Raw fish provides many benefits to your dog, cat, or ferret's raw diet, but you may have some concerns over what fish are safe to feed. In this video, I will be going over why you should add raw oily fish and shellfish to your pet's raw diet, which ones are the most beneficial and safe to feed, and the common concerns when feeding raw fish, as well as ways to ensure safety. So make sure to stick around till the end of the video. Why is it suggested to feed raw fish? Raw oily fish are the easiest way to meet the EPA and DHA omega-3 fatty acid requirements. Your pet's diet is most likely lacking EPA and DHA if it doesn't include whole prey. EPA is important to your pet's health because it aids in reducing inflammation, and DHA for brain development and maintenance. Not only does it provide these beneficial fatty acids, a few oily fish are also high in vitamin D, which also tends to be lacking in a raw diet that doesn't include whole prey. Unlike humans, rodents, horses, and a handful of livestock animals, most carnivores cannot synthesize vitamin D into their skin after exposure to the sun. Therefore, they receive it from a bioavailable food source, a whole prey animal. So, what fish are the safest and most beneficial to feed? You want to feed oily fish that are low on the food chain because they often fall low on the mercury scale. The chart I always reference is this one. The top right corner has the most beneficial and safest fish you could feed your pet, and yes, you could feed oily fish to kibble-fed pets as well. Let's go over a few of these fish to see why they're beneficial to feed and where you can source them. Number 1, mackerel. This is my all-time favorite fish to feed because it provides the most EPA and DHA in comparison to other oily fish, and it's quite high in vitamin D. Feeding mackerel means you can possibly kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Additionally, it's pretty easy to find if you have an Asian market in your area. If you don't, you may also be able to find it canned at your local grocery store. Make sure it's canned in water, and if you have an option between a few, choose the one with the lowest sodium. I often rinse my canned fish and shellfish under cold water to remove excess salt. Number 2, salmon. This is another fish that is quite high in EPA and DHA as well as vitamin D. This will be the easiest fish to source, but probably also the most expensive. It's always best to get wild caught over farmed, but if it is wild caught, make sure to find out where it was sourced. Salmon from the Pacific Northwest should be frozen solid at -4 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 weeks before feeding to eliminate the risk of salmon poisoning. This is the main reason why you often hear people say it isn't safe to feed raw salmon. Even if it's not sourced from the Pacific Northwest, if it's wild caught, it's always smart to freeze first. Salmon and many other wild-caught fish can contain the parasite anisakis, which I will go over at the end of this video. Number 3, herring. This is another fish that ranks decently high in EPA and DHA and is a smaller option if you don't want to deal with cutting up larger fish. These can often be found in Asian markets. This is a fish that contains thiaminase, which, if stored in contact with other meat, can damage the thiamine in that food. Because of this, if you're meal prepping, keep the herring separate. Number 4, sardines, smelt, and anchovies. These are grouped together because they rank pretty similarly. Sardines are a bit higher in vitamin D, however. These oily fish are a great size for smaller dogs, cats, and ferrets, and typically easy to source, especially sardines, as you can often find them canned at most grocery stores. Again, make sure they're canned in water and not oil or sauce. Smelt are another fish that contain thiaminase, so remember to not include them with the rest of your pet's food when prepping. Now let's go over shellfish. Items like blue mussels and oysters not only provide EPA and DHA, they also provide a few other nutrients that happen to be lacking in homemade raw diets. Let's start out with mussels. Blue mussels are high in manganese as well as B vitamins. Green-lipped mussels are another option to feed, but blue mussels are a lot higher in these nutrients. Raw mussels must be cooked or steamed before feeding to avoid Toxoplasma gondii infection. If you buy mussels and they're on the half shell or completely out of their shell, that means they have already been steamed and they're ready to feed. And then there's oysters. Oysters are concentrated in zinc, so you don't need to feed too many. Just like mussels, these need to be cooked and steamed to eliminate the risk of Toxoplasma gondii infection. If you find oysters canned in water, they have already been cooked and are ready to feed. So what about parasites? The main concern owners have when being told it's beneficial to feed raw is parasites. A common parasite found in raw fish is the anisakis, which can cause GI issues to the pets and humans that eat it. This is often a concern with sushi. How do you prevent feeding this as well as other possible parasites to your pet? According to the CDC, either cook the seafood adequately or freeze at -4 degrees Fahrenheit or below for at least 7 days. If you plan to feed any wild-caught fish, always freeze for 3 weeks to be 100% sure there will be no risk of parasites. As I mentioned before, other issues when feeding raw fish is salmon poisoning and thiaminase, which can be avoided by freezing for 3 weeks and not storing high thiaminase fish with other meat. Now, onto a few other common questions. Does fish and shellfish count into the muscle meat percentage? No. Since fish and shellfish are fed as a meal addition to fill nutritional gaps and are not nutrient dense enough to be a main protein source, it's not counted. However, this doesn't mean you shouldn't take into account the micro and macronutrients it's adding to the meal if you're analyzing your pet's daily intake. Do we need to remove the fish bones? No. Raw fish bones are completely safe to feed, just like other raw meaty bones. Because their bones are so small, it barely counts into the daily bone intake percentage. Are the scales on the fish safe to feed? Yes, the skin of the fish is very beneficial and shouldn't be removed. The scales are quite small and won't cause any harm to your pets. And finally, what can you do if your pet's being picky with fish and shellfish? One thing that has helped me is feeding them frozen. They're still soft enough for my dog to munch on, but they aren't slimy and floppy, which may turn some dogs off. My cat and ferret never liked them frozen though. Another option is dehydrating them if you have a dehydrator or buying them dehydrated. There will be some nutrient loss, but it's better than nothing. Grinding or cutting up the fish and shellfish and mixing it with the food is also an option. I do this for my cat. Finally, try a different fish. My cat and dog hate sardines. Not sure why, they won't even try to eat them, but they love mackerel and smelt. It's all about trial and error. If you want to know how much and how often to feed fish and shellfish, and you're also interested in learning about other meal additions that provide missing nutrients, check this video out.